There are different strands, as you say, of the criminal cases against both Trump himself and a number of his associates. As you mentioned, in Arizona yesterday, we had indictments both of the so-called fake electors, Republican activists in that state who fraudulently claimed to be the true members of the Electoral College for that state, as well as a number of Trump's legal associates, including some who have been charged elsewhere in similar cases around the country, such as Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York, who became a Trump confidant.
Yeah. So those cases go ahead. What about this big test later on? The Supreme Court heavily, I would say, conservative, with many appointments made by Donald Trump himself. How do you think they're likely to lean with this broad brush request for immunity?
Yeah, I think the likely outcome is that they will deny complete immunity, but the interesting details will be in how they define what acts are official and what are not. Judges below them in the district and then the Circuit Court of Appeals have ruled very strongly against the Trump case. They've said that the fundamental constitutional principle that no man is above the law really needs to be applied here, and that Trump's argument that he would have needed to have been impeached and removed to then to be charged criminally is the exact opposite of what Trump claimed at the time when he was actually being impeached. So there's a lot of shifting ground here. Most of this really is to delay the criminal cases against Trump in the federal courts, especially. There are 4 different criminal trials in different jurisdictions. Of course, Trump himself will be stuck in New York City today as arguments continue in one of those trials, the one about hush money for one of his former mistresses and whether that violated business fraud rules and electoral reporting rules.
Yeah, and he was there early at 6 o'clock this morning meeting Teamsters as he tries to win some support from the unions. Also, Andrew, in Arizona, lawmakers there are already pushing to scrap this arcane 1864 abortion ban that has been used to try and restrict women's rights in 2024. Do you think they are going to have success with this?
Well, it now depends on the Arizona Senate. The Arizona House, which is run by the Republican Party, voted quite narrowly to advance a bill overturning that 1864 law. Just enough Republicans joined with the Democrats in that chamber to overturn the law. It's not clear that the Senate vote will come the same way. There are plenty of people in the pro-life movement in the U.S. who are really adamant that the 1864 law is great, actually, and that a total ban on abortion is what's called for. So this is playing out, of course, in Arizona. It's playing out in national politics as well, because reproductive rights have become a flashpoint on the campaign trail for the presidential candidates. Joe Biden, of course, doing his best to emphasize those conservative Supreme Court justices you just mentioned, who were put on the court in part because of their views on abortion rights and who delivered for Trump and for the conservative coalition in overturning Roe v. Wade.
Yeah. It's been a big week legislatively. Of course, we saw Ukraine packages passed, Israel packages, and also in part of this was this ban on TikTok. Now, Biden has moved very quickly. He's signed it off. What's your view on this? Do you think it's an overreach? How do you think this is going to play out in the 9 months that TikTok has to sell off?
Yeah, well, certainly some of it is symbolic. The Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, is in China right now, trying to sort of smooth relations with the Chinese government as, his boss, President Biden, sort of pursues a, fairly combative economic policy against China in terms of tariffs, and now with the potential divestiture of TikTok. This is certainly going to court, right? TikTok's argument will be they're being picked on, that they don't have any real connection to the Chinese Communist Party, that they don't give information, gathered from its users to the Chinese government. I don't pretend to know the detailed facts of that. I do think that politically this plays well, among the national security hawks in the U.S., but of course a lot of people use TikTok and are nervous that it will get shut down. So even Trump, who had declared TikTok a national emergency, actually in those words back when he was president, has sort of turned on Biden and called this an overreach. So I think it's going to play out in relatively complicated ways, but ways which will then guide the U.S.-China relationship moving forward, too.
Yeah. There's been quite a big upsurge in pro-Palestinian protests right across the country. They've turned anti-Semitic, threatening to many Jewish students. One campus has gone right back online. How much of a challenge is this for colleges and universities to navigate at the moment?
Well, it's very tricky, and there are both good faith and bad faith actors on both sides, I think, here. College presidents, of course, have come under fire for not protecting Jewish students on campus. Palestinian protesters, or pro-Palestinian protesters, rather, have felt that they are not being listened to, that they are, where they are peacefully protesting, have not gotten much traction, and indeed, in the last couple of days, have seen, armed police called on them in Texas, for example. So the crackdown has been harsh even on peaceful protesters, but then there are certainly, again, bad faith actors from outside the college community, probably a few within as well, but certainly without, at Columbia University, you mentioned they'd gone online. I think most of the issues there were caused by people who were not actually part of the college itself, but took advantage of the open nature of college campuses in the United States to really press a much more violent and extreme agenda than even their student allies would have appreciated. So, this is a very complicated issue. I guess the good news for colleges is that we're coming to the end of the academic year, but I do think you could see disruptions in graduations as those occur in the spring and summer. And of course, this too spills over into presidential politics. Everything's about presidential politics this year. To the degree that those on the left of the Democratic Party are not enthusiastic about Joe Biden's handling of the war or the U.S. response to it, you might see, real sort of fall off in enthusiasm for Biden in the fall.
Yeah, indeed. And I guess which explains why the Speaker, on a good week for him, he's getting quite a lot of praise for the way he's managed some of this legislative passage. But he turned up on a campus to sort of express his support for those saying that that some of these college officials should be sacked.
Yeah, well, it's been sort of a mantra of the Republican leadership to call for the resignation of college presidents. They don't like higher education institutions generally, see them as elitist and, more importantly, Democratic leaning. And so, it was an easy photo op for Speaker Johnson. He has absolutely nothing to do with anything involved in that particular affair. But, I guess he made some hay with his base. And of course, his base in the House Republican Party is actually quite angry with him because of his reliance on Democrats to pass almost everything that the House has been able to pass this year. So on the one hand, he is sort of touting his bipartisan triumphs. On the other, trying to shore up his partisan bona fides by scolding students, at the gates of Columbia University.
Yeah. You're based in London, close to Europe. I understand there's some Politico reporting that has Europe quite concerned about what another Trump presidency might be and what it might mean for the European Union as to whether it could be quite divisive.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I'm here in London for this year. I'll be back in the U.S. in the fall. It's just in time for the election. But
Lucky
you're
you.
Certainly right. Maybe I can extend my stay. Definitely, I think people are concerned. The EU and, of course, NATO more broadly, perhaps, are very concerned about the whiplash that might occur if Mr. Trump returned to office. He clearly is, nowhere near as sympathetic to Ukraine after the Russian invasion as the current administration. He's not nearly as committed to NATO, has been much more sort of hectoring in terms of how he scolds NATO and indeed has threatened to pull out of that alliance. So I do think there are real worries here about the stability of U.S. foreign policy and the reliability, frankly, of the U.S. as a strategic partner should Mr. Trump come back into office.
Yeah. Andrew, well, great to catch you while you are in London. We hope maybe to do it again soon. Thanks for your time.
Sure, that'd be my pleasure. Thank you, Beverly.